Okay, well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our inaugural Mitchell Institute Forum for 2019. Hope you had a good break over the Christmas holidays. And we are fortunate, and we could not have had or have a better speaker to kick off our Mitchell Institute year for 2019. I think all of you are very familiar with the Honorable Matt Donovan, the Undersecretary of the Air Force, so I'm not going to go into a long biography, but I will say the United States Air Force and all of us in the defense community are extremely fortunate to have somebody who has been at the tip of the spear and is competent in all the ways and means of the United States Air Force as the Undersecretary. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming the Undersecretary of the Air Force, the Honorable Matt Donovan.
Well, good morning. It's good to see a bunch of familiar faces and then always a few new ones that I look forward to talking to. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate all that non-introduction. But you know, usually he talks about when he was gunning me in a BFM fight or something, so I should be happy. But we appreciate Dave Deptula and everything he does to advocate for the United States Air Force. Appreciate his long years of service as well, too. And I always look forward to reading anything that comes out that has a Mitchell Institute logo at the top as well, too. It's always very informative and helpful to our cause. So I'm going to go through some prepared remarks here, and then we'll get into what you want to talk about today. 100 years ago today, representatives from 27 nations convened at the Palace of Versailles, where they opened one of the most famous conferences in world history. The Paris Peace Conference would ultimately produce 5 treaties that marked the end of World War I. However, the agreements they reached to end the war to end all wars failed in their lofty aim, as the world merely experienced just an intermission in hostilities. In time, America would learn a costly lesson on the folly of neglecting the rise of great power competition. In the year since I last spoke at the Mitchell Hour, and that year went by really fast, doesn't seem like a year ago, but we've continued to face the most competitive and dangerous international security environment we've seen in generations. We face overt challenges to the free and open international order and remain focused on the reemergence of long-term strategic competition between nations. This year, we have seen our emerging and re-emerging competitors continue to rapidly modernize their armed forces to compete directly with the United States. Foremost among them, China and Russia are investing heavily in advanced technologies they believe will offset our strengths. China publicly aims to become the world's preeminent artificial intelligence power by 2030 and plans to devote vast resources to that end, including $63 billion over the next 6 years. Resting on the wealth of data generated by its 1.4 billion citizens, China is designing intelligent and autonomous aircraft, vessels, and ground vehicles, developing multi-sensor data fusion and prediction systems, and driving advances in AI-enabled cyber and electronic warfare. Our Russian competitors are also planning to expand their cutting-edge research, inspired by Putin's belief that the country that masters AI will rule the world. Like China, they target investments with clear military application. They are striving to develop autonomous weapon systems, modernize their nuclear weapons and delivery platforms, and capture the world's attention with tests of hypersonic weapons. Our national defense strategy recognizes this rapidly changing landscape. It asserts that our competitors grow and modernize, so we cannot stand motionless. It posits that a force shaped by 2 decades of counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations must grow and evolve to meet the demands of great power competition. To maintain our dominance and prevail over these competitors, our national defense strategy directs us to simultaneously accomplish 5 priority missions. We must defend the homeland. We must provide a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. We must prepare to defeat a powerful conventional enemy, all while deterring opportunist aggression and disrupting violent extremists in a cost-effective manner. To implement this strategy and maintain America's warfighting edge, the Air Force must grow from its current force of 312 operational squadrons. For an era of great power competition, the Air Force we need has 386 operational squadrons. America is building a more lethal and ready Air Force, and we're fielding tomorrow's Air Force faster and smarter than ever before. Under the strong leadership of former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, the Air Force made great strides in implementing the National Defense Strategy and meeting America's defense challenges today and into the future. Following the release of the NDS, Congress appointed a commission that was independent and nonpartisan to evaluate the strategy and the forces and resources required to achieve its aims. As they reflected on the greatest threats to our national interests, they affirmed what our airmen have learned over decades of service and experience. Their report argues that, quote, regardless of where the next conflict occurs or which adversary it features, the Air Force will be at the forefront. This last year, the Air Force also undertook a study of our priority challenges. We analyzed thousands of simulations and warfighting campaign models to establish the force size and capabilities we need to implement the National Defense Strategy. Based on our current operations plans, concepts of operation, and improved defense planning scenarios, we determined that the Air Force must grow by about approximately 25%. Our findings conclusively demonstrate what the National Defense Strategy Commission also asserts: the Air Force is too small for what the nation requires. This means our current 312 operational squadrons, the basic units of combat power we present to warfighting commanders, must grow to that 386 operational squadron level. These operational squadrons consist of the Air Force's combat support capabilities, fighters, bombers, ICBM, space, cyber, ISR, command control communications, refueling tankers, cargo airlifters, all the tools that the Air Force employs as part of the Joint Warfighting Team. On Tuesday, Senator Jim Inhofe, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, spoke from the Senate floor on military capacity shortfalls facing our country. He reminded us that our Air Force fighter fleet is now 50% smaller than it was 25 years ago, and how our adversaries are fielding aircraft with capabilities that approach our own, but at a much faster rate. He also quoted our Secretary, Dr. Heather Wilson, when arguing that the Air Force is too small for what the nation asks. However, increased capacity, while necessary, is not sufficient. For nearly 30 years, our adversaries have studied how we fight. They have crafted their militaries to attack our American way of war, initiating conflict with a barrage of airstrikes, but only after a long buildup of forces on large air bases and fixed infrastructure close to the conflict zone. We can't expect to prevail over these challenges by recycling old ideas with new equipment. That's exactly what our adversaries expect, and that's the fight that they're training and preparing for. We will not comply. Instead, we will confront them with forward-thinking operational concepts, new technologies, and optimized force structures. As Major General Mike Fantini told you last month, we stood up our new Air Force Warfighting Integration Capability, or AFWIC, to examine these issues and serve as our future force design team. This new group consists of cross-functional teams charged to think creatively and develop revolutionary solutions to our challenges. Their work will guide our future investments and will focus on balancing current operations and readiness while leveraging new technologies to extend our dominance. Redesigning a force to dominate 21st century warfare is a monumental task. To begin tackling this problem, AFWIC is building on our current analysis and investigating alternative operating concepts and force designs. The Air Force We Need study used our current operating concepts and programs of record and extrapolated their performance to the year 2030, which is the focus year of our analysis. This first option produced our need for the 386 operational squadrons and forms the capacity-based foundation for 3 additional design alternatives. The second option pursues disruptive technologies to effectively defend our airfields and project power from within highly contested areas. The third alternative projects power from outside contested areas with long-range capabilities. It examines advanced technology to find and hold targets at risk, communication architectures that maintain battle space awareness, and survivable munitions that deliver effects at rapid speed. Finally, the last option leverages disruptive technology to deploy advanced and autonomous systems without necessarily relying on fixed bases. Intuitively, we expect our analysis to yield a hybrid combination of all these alternatives. However, we're deeply examining each one in turn to clearly understand their relative strengths and weaknesses. We're doing so through rigorous modeling, simulation, and wargaming, and will ultimately produce the best balance of capabilities to execute new and decisive warfighting strategies. While it is too late to inform this coming year's budget request, we are confident this work will directly inform our fiscal year 2021 budget development. We are including more detail on the foundational analysis and the three alternative conceptions in our upcoming report on future aircraft inventories. This is the Air Force's version of the three independent studies mandated by Section 1064 of the FY18 National Defense Authorization Act. This report, accompanied by the other two studies mandated in the law, will be submitted to Congress by March 1st of 2019. As we flesh out these design alternatives, you can be confident America is building a more lethal and a more ready force. Indeed, restoring readiness remains a top Air Force priority. I thank Congress for the 2 years of increased funding in the 2018 bipartisan budget agreement. This helped us prioritize resources for the 204 operational squadrons that are most relevant to a peer competitor fight. These squadrons are on track to reach an 80% readiness level by the end of fiscal year 2020, 6 years sooner than projected. With these funds, we were able to develop a robust recovery plan and analyze our readiness and reporting challenges. We will ensure the remainder of our operational squadrons also reach an 80% readiness level by fiscal year 2022. Overall, the Air Force remains ready to fight tonight, as more than 75% of our highest priority squadrons are ready to deploy their lead elements at a moment's notice. At the same time, improved readiness demands modernized equipment, and we're advancing several modernization efforts to dominate the threats outlined in the NDS. The Air Force provides two legs of our nuclear triad and most of our nuclear command and control infrastructure. This force is the bedrock of our security and the foundation upon which American military power rests. To preserve this deterrent, we're fully committed to the ground-based strategic deterrent and the long-range standoff weapon. These programs will ensure our air and ground-based nuclear weapons can survive and penetrate adversary defenses for decades to come. We're proud to report that the B-21 Raider is progressing on schedule. Our next-generation penetrating bomber will employ the latest technology and be capable of delivering both nuclear and conventional weapons to hold any target at risk anywhere on the globe. We're also glad to finally accept our first KC-46, a more survivable and capable platform that will form the backbone of our future aerial refueling fleet. Although we identified several deficiencies during our developmental test process, Boeing is contractually committed to correct them, and our warfighters are eager to begin training and operating on this very capable aircraft. We also remain dedicated to fifth-generation fighter procurement with the F-35A. As Chief Goldfein likes to say, in our dynamic security environment, information is the new coin of the realm. This is what makes the F-35 an essential element of our multi-domain team. It's more than just an aircraft. It's a fusion machine where the pilot can call audibles as the quarterback for the entire joint force. It does so not only with information gathered in the cockpit, but by fusing data from every other aspect of the network, even before it takes off. This data synthesis machine will also play a critical role in our emerging advanced battle management system. Speaking of ABMS, ABMS is our survivable and more lethal successor to legacy systems like JSTARS. Currently, we use a single aircraft with its radar to understand the battle space and provide command and control for our forces. In the future, we'll provide an improved capability by merging data from numerous distributed sensors across all domains. Ideally, every aircraft, ship, infantry battalion, or satellite will connect to this network and feed the data it collects into databases that can be manipulated by powerful algorithms. Through advanced processing technology, we'll fuse these individual data points into a single comprehensive picture of the battle space. With this knowledge, our combatant commanders can accelerate the decision speed, outmaneuver our opponents with superior information, and converge effects from all domains, presenting multiple simultaneous dilemmas to our adversaries. As a distributed and self-healing network, ABMS will also absorb and adapt to the losses of individual nodes, eliminating the risk of relying on a single vulnerable platform. As we prepare for peer competitive conflicts, we will deter and defend and protect against threats to U.S. and allied space systems as well. We're doing so in 3 ways. First, we're testing and devising new operating concepts for space and using them to inform our budget. Second, we're aggressively pursuing space acquisition reform. This year, our Space and Missile Systems Center removed 3 layers of bureaucracy and empowered program officers to take initiative and move faster. Rather than request permission for every decision, they can now manage their programs instead of managing the bureaucracy. By executing smartly, we're now issuing contracts for innovative prototypes twice as fast as traditional contracting procedures. Finally, we're expanding our integration with partners and allies. This includes unprecedented cooperation with other military services, intergovernmental agencies, and international partners. This past October, our Schriever War Game included participants from 27 U.S. agencies, as well as the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Germany, France, and for the first time, Japan. We will meet future threats as a joint international coalition, so we're building the relationships and processes that will leverage our collective strengths. As we institute a culture of innovation and rapid acquisition, we are fielding tomorrow's Air Force faster and smarter than ever before. The National Defense Strategy directs the Department of Reform for greater performance and affordability. Our Air Force acquisition and research programs are one of the most successful elements of this reform. Make no mistake about it, we're in a race with our competitors to discover and field game-changing technologies. We must change the way we buy things to get capability to the warfighter faster. Last year, we set a goal to take out 100 years from our acquisition program timelines. As of today, we've reduced these timelines by 71 years, in some cases by using new acquisition authorities granted to us by Congress, and in others just by tailoring the program using authorities we already have. This approach enables greater emphasis on prototyping and experimentation, incentivizing tailored requirements and acquisition strategies, and leveraging agile software development. Our Kessel Run software development initiative pairs warfighters with coders and has saved over $13 million per month in aerial refueling costs at CENTCOM's Combined Air Operations Center. We've also saved about $15 billion by fostering greater competition, evident in our recent contract awards, such as the TX and the UH-1 helicopter replacement. We're also expanding who we contract with and changing how we structure those contracts. Today, small businesses and startups are increasingly becoming the hubs of high technology innovation. To harness their creative and inspiring ideas, we are moving fast and breaking down the bureaucratic barriers that have stifled those partnerships. Last November, our AFWorks and Small Business Innovation Research teams conducted an experiment with a new one-page, one-day small business contract. They aimed to sign 100 contracts in 100 hours. They reached that goal in less than half the time, awarding 106 contracts in just 42 hours. We're building on this success at our upcoming Pitch Day, you may have heard about, on March 6th and 7th in New York City. This event gives startups and entrepreneurs an opportunity to pitch solutions to Air Force problems and compete for a share of the $650 million we have set aside for small businesses. Through February 6th, small businesses can go online and submit proposals on how their technology and ideas can help us dominate the future. We will invite the most promising proposals to pitch their ideas in person on March 6th, and the winners will receive awards of up to $158,000 that same day. Now, these awards are not the end state, but rather the beginning of what we expect will be game-changing technologies development. People showing us what we didn't know we needed. We're also pursuing comprehensive changes on how we gather, use, and share data. This past October, Secretary Wilson designated me as the Air Force's Chief Information Officer. Coupled with my role as the Air Force's Chief Management Officer and as direct supervisor of our new Chief Data Officer, we're integrating these functions to spearhead a digital Air Force initiative. Data will power next-generation combat, so we must control and manipulate massive volumes of information to outthink and outmaneuver our opponents. As you have heard our Chief Joan Goldfein say many times, we want every system in our Air Force to connect, to share, and to learn. We are implementing several reforms to realize this vision and to bring our disaggregated systems into the digital age. First, a digital Air Force must have structured and enforced data standards that allow diverse systems to communicate, merge data, and extract insights at rapid speed. Second, we're producing a common digital backbone for this data and information flow. This year, we're migrating 100 mission applications to the cloud, and will ultimately leverage commercial industry for network connectivity and IT services in our Enterprise IT as a Service initiative. We'll ensure our airmen have uninterrupted access to the data they need, where and when they need it. Finally, we're reforming how we manage our people and business systems to improve performance and affordability. When completed, these reforms will ultimately impact every aspect of our Air Force. They will affect our operational warfighting, our maintenance and logistics, readiness tracking and prediction, and resource allocation. This won't be an easy task, as it requires a shift in our culture, as many commercial industries can tell you when they try to digitize. But it's absolutely necessary for us to remain an effective joint warfighting force. To summarize, our future is bright, and it's an exciting time to be part of the Air Force. But we can't forget that the Budget Control Act is still the law of the land and continues to threaten the advances we seek and undermine the progress that we've made. If these spending caps remain in place, we risk a return to sequestration, an outcome designed to be so terrible that we would never face it. Well, we did face it. In 2013, the results were devastating. We were forced to stand down a third of our combat flying squadrons for 4 months. We canceled or reduced our participation in 2/3 of our large-scale exercises, such as Red Flag. Our depot facilities lost over 1 million work hours of maintenance. Each and every civilian airman, and I was one of them, was furloughed for over 2 weeks without pay. And we suffered from that substantial loss in productivity. The return of sequestration in fiscal year 2020 would be even more deeply destructive and shadow the progress we've made over these past 2 years. Above all, our military must continue to receive the funding we need to execute our national defense strategy. We need sufficient, timely, and predictable budgets to face an increasingly dangerous international security environment. We cannot forget that great power competition demands great power commitment. Our nation needs to embrace this long-term commitment so we can compete, deter, and win for the American people. If you detected a note of urgency in my remarks, then I successfully conveyed the way your Air Force is approaching the challenges that are looming ahead of us. But we are moving out. Well, thanks for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. All right, thanks. Yes.
Secretary, thank you for being here. John Turpak, Air Force Magazine.
Yeah.
Help us out with this F-15X. The Air Force has said for well over a decade, almost two, we don't want to buy any new old airplanes. We want to progress to 5th generation as quickly as possible, and maybe even to 6th as soon after that. is there a validated JROC requirement for more F-15s, and how is this potentially coming into the force?
Well, if you all recall, the last time I was here, I was supposed to be here a week after the budget came out, and I actually came the morning the budget was supposed to come out in the afternoon. So I'm not going to confirm or deny any pre-decisional information in a pre-budget release environment. I like my job. But you know, the main concept is that we've got to replace our fighter force, okay? If you look back at the original F-35 acquisition strategy, we had planned to get to 110 airplanes per year, procured just of the F-35A. Well, things happen, and you know, we don't have to plow back through F-35 acquisition program history, but we all know what happened. We ended up delaying, and it could be because of the acquisition strategy of concurrent development and production and all that. But I can tell you that, you know, we're very happy with the F-35s that are coming off the line today. You know, go ask any of those pilots flying them out at Hill, and they'll tell you they're just kicking butt with that thing. But history being what it is, and because we never quite got to the procurement ramp that we needed to, we're in a bit of a pickle. And the pickle is we don't have the capacity that we need. So, for example, and this is not to be pejorative to the F-35 program, but as of right now, today, the original acquisition strategy, we were supposed to have 736 F-35s. We have 174. Even Bob Gates, back when he was Defense Secretary in, I think it was 2009, he said, hey, you know, look at the mismatch. The Chinese will have 0 stealth airplanes in 2020, and we'll have 1,200. Okay, well, he wasn't very good on his crystal ball either. So, you know, what we need is we need to increase our fighter procurement replacement rate. And even Congress, you know, put a law in, I forget which one, 17 NDA, I think that has a mandatory fighter inventory floor for the Air Force. And I see Otis Winkler in the back. He could probably tell me exactly what that number is. I think it's 1,950 total and 1,175 combat coded or something like that. If we don't replace our airplanes that are getting ready to age out, then we're going to bust that floor, and not at a good time as we come into the mid-20s. So that's primarily what we're concerned about is the recapitalization rate. More to follow.
Doesn't that marry you to an F-15 logistics train, though, for many more years than you expected to? And doesn't it potentially also put the acting SecDef in a problematic situation with regard to his recusal of Boeing events?
Well, I mean, you know, he has recused himself from other things, you know. When the KC-46 issue was going on, we skipped him. We went right to Secretary Mattis because of the recusal. So those safeguards were in place, and it applies to any program that applies for recusal. He's not the only senior leader that, you know, came from industry that he's recused from. But, you know, as far as an F-15 supply chain or maintenance base, we have the F-15E. The F-15E is a 20,000-hour airplane. That's probably going to be around for quite some time.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's work up to the hard one. Give me a softball. Yes.
Thank you. Sandra Irwin with Space News. SMC, you said...
I said start with the softball.
This is easy. This is a very easy question. SMC is removing 3 layers, you said, of management or approvals. Out of how many layers are they removing 3 layers? And Can you say what programs are being reduced in layers? Thank
Have
you.
I introduced you to my public affairs officer, Captain Katrina Cheeseman? She's new. You'd have to go to J.T. Thompson out there, and he would be glad to give you those details out there at SMC. This is part of what he's been calling SMC 2.0, where he's re-looking at the way the acquisition programs are managed within that organization and trying to reduce the stovepipes, go across the different portfolios, and reorganize the way he's managing through the PEO to the program managers. But we can get you those details on.
So they haven't given you those kind of details?
Oh, I'm sure they have, but I get lots of details every day. So, but we'll get those to you. Let's go to the second row.
Sir, thanks for your words today, and thanks for your leadership in the Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Grant Mizell, Air Force Fellow over at Georgetown University. You mentioned deterrence, and despite the Air Force's overmatched, or the U.S. military's overmatched deterrence posture around the world, both conventional and nuclear, we've seen incredible gains by our adversaries, Russia obviously making their moves, as well as North Korea gaining nukes. We're recapitalizing, that's great, but does the Air Force have a message? Do we need to change our deterrence policy or our messaging to our adversaries to prevent them from making those gains, even with our recapitalization of force?
Well, I mean, we'd have to parse out exactly what you mean by gains, and can you tell me where deterrence failed? Where has the United States deterrence failed? You could make some arguments about the Crimea but if you think back on the North Korean issue and the whole thing where I've got a bigger button than you and that kind of thing. I mean, that's really, maybe an unconventional way of approaching it, but he's talking about deterrence there, and I think deterrence, especially American nuclear deterrence, is what brought Kim to the table to begin with, right? Because deterrence is really consists of two parts, right? At first, it has to have the capability to follow through if you're going to do it, and then it has to have the intent and the will. But you're right. I mean, the one thing about secrecy and having behind the green door programs, how does that help you in deterrence if no one knows you have it, right? Remember Dr. Strangelove? It's not a deterrent, Dimitri, if no one knows you have it, right? So you make a valid point. And there are efforts going on within the Department of Defense to take a look at that. What do we reveal? What do we keep close hold? Those are continuing conversations. Yeah.
John Simmons with the Roosevelt Group. You've got 100 new members of Congress. Luckily, some of them have military experience. You've got a new majority in the House with all new PSMs on the House Armed Services Committee. Senator Inhofe's dealing with the same thing on the Senate side. You have so much going on in the Air Force, Space Force, Space Command. If we have an F-15X and the confusion about what's going on with the F-35, what is the Air Force's plan to get these staff and members up to speed on all these issues?
Yeah.
And I would recommend when you're doing your speech on the Hill, or anybody from the Air Force or DOD, is talk about sequestration
Right.
and the Budget Control Act, because we're having trouble rebuilding Tyndall, where we've got Wall Street types asking us, well, what is the commitment to the F-35? Why
Right.
should we get involved with privatized
Right,
housing?
right.
So there's a lot going on. I know it's not just your job, but is there a plan?
There absolutely is a plan, and it already started. Of those 100 new House members, I've talked to probably 35 or 40 of them already. The secretary's talked to the others. We've called to congratulate them for their election, and then offer to come over and talk to them about the Air Force and what the Air Force means to them, and how they can help, and if they're interested, or just to answer questions. So we have a very robust outreach program going right now, and I tell you, everyone that I've ever talked to said, "Well, thank you very much, and yes, we would like to contact your staff and get you on the schedule." So, and I think with the staffers as well. Of course, coming from there, I know a lot of them, and so I kind of tend to, hey, Madam Secretary, let me take care of the staffers, and you talk to the members, and so we're doing the same thing. I was just over there for about 4 hours on Wednesday going through, meeting all the new staffers, talking with the ones that are holding over. So we are absolutely paying attention to that.
Deptula
back.
told me, don't be bashful. So, missile defense question. We heard a lot at the Pentagon yesterday about some very exotic technologies, laser drones, space-based systems, and F-35 singled out for an anti-cruise missile role. Can you just give us your take on how the Air Force is approaching this challenge of staying ahead of the adversary missile defense, missile threats, please?
Right.
Thank you.
Well, you know, we don't have primary responsibility for missile defense. Of course, that's the MDA. Although we have pieces of it, just like the other services do as well, to provide those trained and ready forces to the combatant commander. And in some cases, it's a regional combatant commander. It may be STRATCOM or it may be NORTHCOM that gets involved in that. So it's very exciting because we're doing a lot of cross-functional work with the other services. Even before we go to meetings with OSD, for example, the 3 service secretaries, they meet weekly. I don't think I've been in a building where I see all 3 service secretaries that are so engaged with each other all the time. Now, they do it without staff, and it gets scary sometimes what comes flying out of them. But I tell you, they have really moved the ball down the court. And a good example is hypersonic. So, you know, one of the things this year is MDA is sort of taking on the hypersonic defense role. That's what we're talking about with the space-based layer and all that thing to be able to detect hypersonic either platforms or weapons. We're you know, all 3 services are working on our own hypersonics programs, but not isolated in stovepipes. We're working together. In fact, all 3 service secretaries signed a memorandum of agreement on how we would approach all 3 of these, or actually there's more programs than that, but how we're going to coordinate, synchronize, and use the synergies of all those hypersonic programs. You know, as far as specifically with F-35, I mentioned in my remarks, you know, it's much more than a fighter. You know, it's like a vacuum for information, and it's vacuuming up all kinds of information. And we're experimenting and showing what is in the realm of the possible with some of these things. You know, Dave Deptula and I, when we flew the old steam engine F-15, you know, our connectivity was radio, you know. Hey, where are you going? You know, I mean, and call-outs and that sort of thing. And we have come so far from that time that that's why we want to get these weapons into the hands of the warfighters, the young captains, the weapons school guys who go, hey, maybe we could try this, and they go out and try it, and next thing you know, it works its way in the tactics manuals, and it becomes the new American way of war. And so there's so much that's with that. Will Roper as our acquisition guy, you know, it wasn't a mistake that we hired him from the job that he was at. You know, which, you know, in the Strategic Capabilities Office, which was to take current capabilities, put them together in different ways and use different concepts of operation to see what we could do. So we're way on board with that. Does that get after your question, or? Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Hi, sir. Courtney Albin with Inside Defense. I wanted to ask, we heard at the end of last year that the Air Force was interested in basing some F-35 squadrons at Tyndall, but that they would need some supplemental funding in order to do that. Can you give us an update on kind of where you're at, how soon you need that money, and also if you've kind of done the analysis to see how much it's going to cost to bring the F-35 to Tyndall and rebuild the flight line?
Yeah. We, of course, we were asked all those questions about 3 weeks after the hurricane came through, and we weren't really prepared yet at that time. But our installations and environment folks, John Henderson, is working really hard to sharpen the pencil on that, and we're continuing to get more refinement on that every day. You know, it's not up to us to ask for a supplemental from Congress. You know, that's through OSD and then through the Office of Management and Budget, how those are passed over to requests for supplemental funding. However, you know, Congress has been very active in asking us to provide information, and we provide information on costs as best we can. Whether we would need it right away, you know, Milcon is 5-year money, and, you know, there's got to be a significant amount of Milcon planning to go in, this construction planning, before that we could really execute, you know, actual construction, and that would take some time. But of course, you know, being the disaster that it was completely unexpected. And although we do maintain some funds for contingency situations like that, that just blew through that cap so fast that we would need to take a look at it. So.
In terms of OSD prioritization, how high up is this on the list from your knowledge?
Well, you know, I mean, OSD, I believe, passed the request to OMB. So, again, it's not really a prioritization because it's also current year execution funding that was not planned for. So, because it happened, I think, October 10th, right? So we're in the FY19 year already. It wasn't like it was at the end of the FY18 where we could have maybe used some fallout funds or that kind of thing. So, yeah. Valerie?
Hi, Valerie Encina with Defense News. In your discussion
Matt
with John-
Donovan, Air Force, not Vampire Diaries.
Okay, I got it. So you mentioned in your conversation with John, or your answer to John, that basically the Air Force has not been able to procure F-35s as quickly as it originally wanted to. But the Air Force also keeps pushing out the timeline where it's going to start procuring 60 F-35s at a time. So I'm wondering, you know, as you guys, you know, look at this budget cycle, are you reconsidering the mix of 5th and 4th gen fighters for, I guess, you know, capability reasons? Are you seeing that there are capability reasons where you might want to put more investment in new 4th gen fighters? And more largely, as you look at new 4th gen fighters or the prospect of a light attack aircraft, are you also re-looking at the F-35 program of record and seeing, do you want to decrease that number?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, the program of record for F-35A is the 1763, and we made no move to change that at all. We're always continuously analyzing 4th gen mix, 5th gen mix, really the mix of all our capabilities across the portfolio. But you have to remember that that there's a bridging strategy that's always involved, right? I mean, we can't just snap our fingers and have 100% 5th gen force. That's just not the way it's going to be. We have folks that are looking to see what would be an optimal mix if there could, but so far we've just been going, what will the mix be that we have at a certain period of time? And then we have to analyze that in campaign modelings and stuff on what it'll be, because it constantly changes. Like I said, you know, when we originally had the acquisition strategy, and you know, and I actually did some work on that when I was over on the committee, was how many airplanes we're supposed to have. The 736 is just the F-35As. We're supposed to have 1,079, I think, in FY16 of those. So, and you got to take a look at what the F-35 was meant to replace, right? The original requirements document was the F-35 was to replace A-10s, F-16s, and 54 F-117s at the time. So that's where it's derived from. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Lee Hudson, Aviation Week. So there was a report to Congress sent last month about F-35 sustainment and how the Air Force has budgeted roughly $4 million per aircraft, but the real cost is $7 million. Could you talk about how you're going to make up that delta? And is this another reason to invest more in 4th gen? Mm-hmm. Because it would cost less to sustain those aircraft.
Well, you know, because the F-35 is still a relatively new weapon system that we don't have a lot of history on, you know, where you can look back at say, an F-15 or an F-16, and we've got 30 years of sustainment history and how much it's going to cost, which we can make it easier to project in the future. That being said, we absolutely know that the F-35 sustainment costs are going to have to come down. There's just too much. You know, when you compare it to the platforms that it's supposed to replace, It's got to be comparable. Now, we know there's a tax for LO. We know there's a tax for advanced technologies and being able to maintain that. But, that will only carry you so far in the argument. We've got to bring it down. Programming sustainment dollars is, and any recovering programmers in here will tell you that it's more of an art than a science. But we've got to get good data from the Joint Program Office on these. We started out with a goal of reducing the sustainment cost of the F-35 by 38%. And we put that out, I forget the exact year that we're driving towards that. But we continually trying to pull that to the left to get that in. I did see the report, I think, was it CBO or?
Actually, Ellen Ward's office.
Oh, that's right, it's their periodic report that they provide the Congress, yeah. I'll have to dig into more details, but you can follow up with PA, they can give you more. Okay?
Bill Sweetman with Northrop Grumman. I was interested in your discussion of the alternative force structures for 2030. Now, as you do that, would those force structures imply different numbers of squadrons and or different numbers of aircraft? I would expect they would if you were going for more larger long-range aircraft in some structures.
Well, that's right, and we think that will inform. Remember, the 386 was based on current operations plans, current concept of operations, and current approved defense planning scenarios. But we needed the baseline from somewhere. The other thing that you can't remember or you can't forget is that quantity has a quality all of its own, right? And that was one of the arguments that was continuously made when the F-22 program was truncated, not by Bob Gatesville, by the way, but in the FY05 POM by Secretary Rumsfeld, is that, as advanced a capability as the F-22 is, and it is, it's the world's most powerful dominant fighter, the one thing it can't do is be in two places at the same time. And that applies really across the board when we take a look at the missions that we have to accomplish and the timelines that we're required to do it in. So, but you're absolutely right. One of the things I used to complain about, and this was probably 10 years ago when they had the F-35 requirement, at 1763 for the next 45 years. And I said it makes it hard to argue that you're replacing F-16s, A-10s, and a handful of F-117s, but you're not gaining any increased capability. It's the capacity versus capability argument, and the can't be two places at one time. But it's hard to argue that I have such an advanced capability that you're really saying that an F-35 equals an F-16 equals an A-10 if you're not going to at least allow for some increase in capability. And there's probably some factor in there, right? How many F-16s does it take to equal an F-35? Well, it's always it depends answer, right? But there's probably some factor with that. Yes.
Hi, David Isby, Air International. In your speech, you mentioned invoked a number of emerging technologies. Where would you personally like to see additional investment to get you where you want to be in 2030, even though there's still a lot of studies to be done? What technologies require more investment?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question because, somebody, no matter what answer I give, somebody else will go, why come you didn't put our, technology in there? But I think the things that I worry about are really advanced data links and communications architectures. I mean, all these things that we talk about, combat clouds or distributed and linked internetwork systems, all, you've seen the OV1, the overlay one that everybody always has that has airplanes and satellites and ground vehicles, and they have the lightning bolts that connect them all together. I'm worried about the lightning bolts, because those tend to be assumed away. And in the advanced cyber, advanced electronic warfare environment, we got to figure out protected and resilient and hidden communications that don't highlight a platform as well. So, yes, sir.
Hi, Mark Pomerleau with C4ISRnet. I was hoping you could provide an update on the internal reorganization of the 2 and the 6 shop, and with that, who would lead such an organization? I assume it would be a newly nominated 3-star. And lastly, with that, how does such a reorganization optimize the Air Force for success?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I told you the Secretary designated me as the Chief Information Officer, the current organization right now is the SAF-CIO A6, right? So it was a combined A6 CIO organization. And we took a look at it and said, is that the optimum way of doing this? And the reason that I was designated this way is so that we could have undersecretary level oversight of those 3 areas I was talking about: chief management, chief information officer, and chief data officer, which I think is appropriate. So, but that was a fallout of now combining the A2 and the A6. One of the things our enterprise IT as a service is trying to get at is to give the people who do networking and those kind of communications jobs to the people who do that the best, and it really is industry. And we have a whole bunch of people that we call cyber operators that are really just doing that communications job, okay? Running cables. I mean, even outdoor plant, indoor plant people, and that kind of thing. I mean, we, in one fell swoop a few years ago, we said they're all cyber warriors, because maybe cyber was the name du jour that we wanted to use. Since that time, we've refined, and we said, they're probably not all cyber operators. The people that do cyber defense operations and cyber offense operations, those are probably our true operators, and the other ones may be more technicians. So instead of just blowing up the career field, what we decided was this enterprise IT as a service may be an opportunity for us to, if you think about a comm squadron on a base that's filled with a lot of these folks that are indoor plant, outdoor plant, and computers and taking care of those kind of things, maybe we could repurpose a lot of those if we went to more of a industry type model, where we have somebody else take care of the socket plate stuff behind it, and we just take care of the computer out to the desk, right? So that is really what's driving that 826. And it's sort of aligned with the other services as well. I mean, the Navy has N26, and it's sort of that same rationale. Does that make sense? Now, as far as who's going to lead it, I mean, we had Dash Jameson, who's the current A2, was nominated to become the A2, A6. I'm not sure where we're at on the, I hadn't seen it on the congressional update, whether it was over there. Any confirmation or nominations that were there and then the Congress changed out, now we have to recertify them and resubmit them over. And I think we're just working our way through that process right now. Go way in the back.
Good morning, sir. Jared Stout with Venable. Thanks for being here. I just had a question about the president and vice president have talked a lot about the space enterprise, and they have a lot of intense interest, obviously. And there's been a lot of discussion about a new acquisition development arm, the Space Development Agency, or something like it. Could you talk a little bit about what you think the future of the acquisition of space assets looks like for the Air Force, if there's something like a Space Development Agency or some new way of doing that?
Well, the first thing I say is the Air Force fully supports the President's guidance on establishing a separate Space Force and all that. The proposal is still in work. We expect it to go over to the Congress at the same time as the budget does. First Monday in February is what the Constitution says, but I'm not sure we're going to make that based on the shutdown. And then secondly, the point is it doesn't really matter what the organization is in the end game. The Air Force continued to stay in focus on making sure there's a warfighter focus on space operations and our space. And you've heard Secretary Wilson talk at length about, you know, how we've shifted from a benign environment and how our adversaries are flexing their muscles in space and that sort of thing. As far as the Space Development Agency, you know, we've heard a lot of talk about it. I'm not sure it's going to be in the legislative proposal. I haven't, it's been a while since I've seen a draft. I saw an early draft way back when. You know, we're also waiting on more specific guidance from the White House through the Space Policy, National Space Policy Council and the Vice President as well, too. So I think it will all shake out. Important thing is the warfighter focus on space operations. And that's, the Air Force is keeping its eye on the ball on that through all the discussions. Okay? Yes, sir.
Sir, good morning. Bertiel van Geel, Netherlands Air Attaché.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. I'm happy to be here with my colleagues here on the right.
Yeah.
I have a question related to the 386 squadrons you mentioned and derived from the NDS, basically. In the NDS, it also stresses the importance of working with allies and partners. So my question is, in that 386, is that a US goes by itself, or are partners and allies contributions also included in that number?
Mm-hmm.
Because when the shit really hits the fan, most likely
Which
NATO.
ship is that?
Sorry. Yeah, technical garbage. Sorry.
Yeah.
But when the shit really hits the fan, again, sorry.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Okay. So my question is, are we incorporated in that number, or is it a US goes by itself?
No, the 386 is U.S. only. But you know, in all this campaign modeling and analysis, and when we do these runs, the contributions of allies are absolutely included in that through existing OPLANs, through agreements that we have as well. And we want to increase that as much as we can, right? Not only because the NDS tells us to do it. I mean, we've been doing that for a long time. You know, the NDS just acknowledged the importance of it. But yeah, it's absolutely part of the calculus, but it's not part of the 386, beyond where we have our normal exchange officers and those kind of things. But the 386 is a U.S. only number, U.S. Air Force only number. Yeah. Okay.
Good morning, sir. Thanks. Lieutenant Colonel Dustin Richards. I'm the Air Force Fellow over the Atlantic Council this year. And I'm curious, the National Defense...
Nice suit.
Thank you. Appreciate it. The National Defense Strategy Commission released its report in November and basically said that the Department of Defense had not been properly funded for years and years and years. My question is, do you foresee any efforts in the near term or even the midterm to try to put a good price tag on what it actually costs to do what the National Defense Strategy says it needs to do, and not argue over, you know, $700 billion versus $750
Right.
or whatever?
Yeah. No, you make an excellent point, and that's the point that you know, when people ask us, well, how are you going to afford 386 squadrons? Well, I mean, you can ask the Navy the same thing. How are you going to afford 355 ship Navy, right? The Secretary Wilson decided that it was just really important to establish what the requirement was. You know, whether we're going to get the money or not, that's for other people to decide. You know, and the way she talks about it is, you know, do you want an Air Force that remains a global power? Or do you want to be a regional power? I mean, these are all questions that are decided by policymakers well above our level. And then also in the debates over across the river with Congress, right? Now, we're going to advocate for what we think we need, and we'll make do with what we get. That's what we've always done. But I think it's important to clearly and loudly articulate what we believe the requirement is. We have a National Defense Strategy. The National Defense Strategy Commission was, I think, overall complimentary of the strategy. They think it hits the mark or is pretty close. I've heard the same thing from across the river you know, from most folks, members that say, hey, that strategy's good. It's like the best one we've had in a long time. And it kind of reflects reality of what's happening and what's been sort of sneaking up on us on the last 25 years since the end of the Cold War, you know. And it's about, hey, you need to start flexing those muscles that you haven't used in a long, long time, which us old guys that were around during the 1980s and understood the, you know, the bipolar standoff with the Soviet Union and the Russian hordes coming down the Fulda Gap, right? I mean, that's what we were based on. That was what the Reagan military buildup was based on. What we're saying is that the National Defense Strategy recognizes that those clouds may be forming on the horizon again, and we'd be well served to be prepared. But, you know, we articulate the requirement, we tell you what we think we need, and then it's up to, of course, the White House and the Congress to decide what we'll get. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. All right, folks. I think I'm getting the hook.
Well, Mr. Undersecretary, thanks very much.
Appreciate it. It's always good.
We appreciate that tour de force, and we also know that you have a big stack of books, plus your multi-hatted role. Probably keeps your reading list pretty filled. So we thought we'd give you a magazine article this time. This is from a February 1946 edition of the National Geographic magazine, and the article is "Air Power for Peace." The father of the United States Air Force, General, it says General of the Army, H.H. Arnold.
He was in 46.
Yeah, he was. But it's an outstanding article, and given your background as a fighter pilot, it's got lots and lots of pictures, so you can get through it real quick. So thanks very much for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That'll be interesting.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.